about engagement with the community, being a part of establishing standards around some of the things that we're doing, whether it be technical standards or user experience standards or ethical standards, and really trying to, as a brand, Cognition, really kind of carrying a flag around a very humanitarian use of advanced technology, right? So our focus is really around how we can use AI and technology for good. For the most part, all of our work to date has been around restorative capabilities, so neuroprosthetic enhancement. So as rudimentary as an application that you might have on your iPhone or iPad can also serve as a prosthetic, cognitive prosthetic or speech prosthetic, depending on what you're doing. So we've been in business since 2014, actually. We started out in like a wearable IoT space where we originally invented a product called a smart stone, which was a little river stone, and it was packed full of sensors, and it was kind of like a gesture controller, and that controller could remotely control mobile apps. So it could detect if you move the stone one particular way, it could trigger a phrase. You could move it another way and it would trigger a different phrase. So it was really about investigating the potential for alternative natural interfaces that were more humane and more intuitive to the human, as opposed to trying to take an old paradigm of, computer interfacing and dealing with keyboards. We're trying to think about what's possible with natural interfaces where tech can kind of disappear and become closer to the human, and allowing the human to flourish through tech augmentation that tends to kind of disappear. So that's really the sort of ethos of Cognition is, again, how do you use technology for good to enhance humanity and create new capabilities, either restorative or for healthy individuals, potentially new augmentative things. For what we're doing now, what I'm really happy to present here today is a product that we've been working on for years. But it wasn't until November that we really kind of took the cover off of what we're doing. And it's a wearable BCI, brain computer interface, that it integrates AR with it, augmented reality with it. So it's one wearable that combines both BCI and AR. And we call it Cognition One. And it's primarily being positioned right now as a wearable that could be what we're trying to kind of create this category or defining this category called assisted reality. So think about assistive tech combined with mixed reality. You put those together and it's assisted reality. But really think about it as AR that could be useful throughout the entire day. So it requires a different way of thinking about the person and the lived experience and how tech can accommodate the person throughout the entire day, as opposed to just simply like having a VR session where I'm, interacting in a conference or I'm, watching a movie or something or playing a game. Those are really discrete, small sort of windows, an hour, 2 hours at a time. We're designing something that can be worn for 6 to 8 hours a day, and think about that context for a moment about how augmented reality, how technology and context awareness of things around you can be more sensorial and more accessible. So that was a lot on one slide. So I'm going to try and pick up the pace here a little bit because we've got 45 minutes, but I wanted to give a nod to the good folks over at neurotech.com, also CB Insights. Early on, we've been recognized as a top 10 BCI startup to watch. The neurotech industry overall is quite diverse and quite large. So I'm sharing this infographic here that came from neurotech.com. It's a bit of a snapshot of the overall neurotech industry. So you can see the breadth of what's available, right? So you were talking, Don, earlier about, neurofeedback and neuromodulation, but these are just segments of the overall neurotech landscape. And so we're over on the right in this actually smaller cohort of companies for BCI. And so some folks in this community may be familiar with BCI, some maybe not, but brain-computer interface primarily in the sense of reading the information from the brain and trying to do something with those as those signals, right? And so we're doing something with those signals as a control signal. So BCI is a control interface. So some of the companies you might be familiar with: Emotive, Control Labs, NextMind, Neurable, Paradromics, Synchron, which is doing an invasive solution, Neuralink, which everybody I'm sure is familiar with, you know, Elon Musk's company, Neuro, OpenBCI, of course. So there's a group of, you know, companies that are focused on BCI, and we're one of them. And we're happy to be a part of that community because, ironically, even though there's a small subset of companies focused on BCI, the use cases and markets that we're all serving are wildly different. You know, so even though we're all in this BCI cluster, you know, the problems that Neuralink are solving are in some ways orthogonal or even complementary to the things that we're solving, right? So I think as neurotechnology receives more funding, receives more adoption in the market, you're going to start to see the even more stratification within BCI. Of those distinctions are going to become more and more clear as you see the markets develop with BCI. For us as a company, there's 8 billion people coming up here, you know, statistically in the world. You know, global populations are growing. If you think about aging populations, the elderly are becoming older, so you have longevity issues, which are awesome. You know, we're getting older, we're living longer, healthier lives. But what that also means is that you're also seeing an increase through aging, through acquired and progressive disorders, things like ALS, traumatic brain injuries, strokes. So you have this kind of inflection where as the populations grow, you're also seeing really large increases in disabilities. And so if you think about roughly 15 to 20% of the world's population has a disability, most of those disabilities, if not all of them, are directly tied to the nervous system. Right. So whether it's your central or peripheral nervous system, whether you're vision, hearing, speech, cognitive, or motor, that's entirely nervous system disabilities. And so I think, you know, in the TransTech world, by supporting companies that are addressing ways to enhance the nervous system for therapeutic good, or ways of tapping into the nervous system to create capabilities that weren't there before, it's a very big opportunity, trillions of dollars of opportunity in market growth. But for us, again, focusing on people with disabilities, there's about 1 billion. Before I talk about breaking into the specific segments that we're working on, I want to share a little bit about who we are. So myself, Andreas Forsland, prior to starting Cognition, I was the head of design and brand at Citrix in their software as a service division. So we made a lot of online applications for professionals. And prior to that, I worked at Philips, Philips Design in particular. So I was in the design group working with R&D across all of Philips's different business units: healthcare, lighting, consumer electronics, and semiconductors, and helping them really think about what's next on second and third horizons for their different business units, and helping to invent new propositions. So early on, I got to tap into their global resources of anthropologists, ethnographers, you know, so it was Philips is a wonderful company, and really learned a lot about how to sort of translate research and science into value propositions into products. So that was my background. Our board of directors here, so Tom Gruber joined us about a year ago. Tom is the former co-founder and CTO of Siri. Some folks in this community may know Tom personally. Siri was acquired by Apple. Tom was the head of advanced development, that group there at Apple for 8 years, and then recently left, and then he joined us on our board. So he's involved with us strategically, and then also helping to some degree with our engineering on strategies for natural language processing and whatnot. Tom Washing, who's a resident from Colorado, he's in Eagle County. So he's formerly the head of SQL Venture Partners there in Colorado, which was a $400 million fund focused on emerging and growth opportunities within health and life sciences. So Tom Washing led our first 2 seed investment rounds and helped syndicate those for us, and is active on our board, and he's a wonderful board member. As far as the company, yeah.
Oh, sorry, just sorry to interrupt, but Tom is actually on the call. I just want to let you know he did dial in. He claims he's sort of bi-coastal. He's more time in California now, but yeah. But Tom is really noticing the Colorado connections. Why I initially wanted to get you guys on board here. So thanks, Tom.
Fantastic, yeah. And Tom and I met here in Santa Barbara, ironically. So and I'll let Tom kind of share with you the funny story about how we met, but I'll leave that for another time. But just as we've grown, you know, Tom met us, and it was really just a handful of people here in Santa Barbara working on a proof of concept. We essentially stitched together, myself and our CTO and a couple of other folks, we stitched together a proof of concept where we connected an emotive EEG headset with some of our own software running on an iPad with some cloud processing integrated. And we had essentially the bones of the very first, what we called thought to speech application, where you could use EEG as a control interface for controlling a mobile application to generate speech. We partnered with Cal Lutheran University. They did an IRB study back in 2016, I think, or 2016, and learned a lot about what works and what doesn't work, and if BCI could actually be a viable communication technology. The answer at that time was no. So the learning curve was too high to deal with motor imagery. The complexity was fairly small as far as degrees of freedom, as far as the sheer number of things that you could control using just a read-only system, especially within certain areas of the brain. So we learned a lot through that IRB study, which we rolled into our strategy for what we're doing today with Cognition One, which in fact is robust, it is reliable, has zero learning curve, there's no training required. So it's quite a lot that we've learned and sort of rolled into the product since our beginnings. But we've grown, so we're 16 people today. We're split between Santa Barbara and Toronto, Ontario. And so we have individuals on the team that are neuroscientists, clinical experts in speech pathology, and linguists, biosignal and systems engineers. So we've built a really great small but mighty team is what I call it. So we sort of punch above our weight, and we've been able to do a lot with the resources that we have. But going back to the market, so if you take that billion people, you can roughly divide it into these populations or these segments. So vision, hearing, and speech. And what jumped out to me when we first started the company was how large the cohort was for individuals that were affected by speech disabilities. But when you double click or triple click into that, you realize just how diverse those populations are. So it's, I think it's that complexity that has prevented a lot of innovation in the areas of speech augmentation, primarily because you don't know which problem to solve. And so what we've taken an approach, which means that there's a lot of bespoke solutions in the market that are good for one or two of these types of pathologies, but there hasn't been someone that came in from a complex systems perspective and said, can we design a platform that everyone can use, right? And then that they could then tailor and personalize that experience to their specific needs. So the needs of someone with cerebral palsy, for instance, physically from an augmentation perspective is very different than someone with ALS. So you think about these as two polar opposite use cases where someone may have CP, they might have chorea or other kinds of situations where they can't stop moving their body, uncontrollable muscle movement and so on. Someone with ALS, it's a progressive disorder where at some point they can't move their body at all. And so you have absolute paralysis on one end of the spectrum and you have absolute kinetic movement on the other. And then somewhere in the middle, you have some range of average, like a typical average healthy individual. And so what we did is rather than try and go in and solve every single one of these problems, we looked at clinically, cognitively, physically, occupationally, what are all of the things that are going on with these different disorders, and how can we create some standards around say sliders, knobs and sliders that could allow us to personalize the experience for individuals without having to re-engineer or reinvent the hardware. So really in the software itself, we're building in algorithms and settings that allow us to tailor the system for someone with CP versus ALS versus locked-in syndrome versus Huntington's, as an example. So if you think about this, there's a number of variables like range of motion is a variable, literacy level is a variable, things like this. And so we start to understand, visual acuity and eyesight is a variable. Dermal acceptance, head size is a variable. So these are some real sort of simplistic sizing, personalization things that we're doing to help make the technology adapt to the user as opposed to forcing a user to learn something new. When you look at all of these folks, though, we are right now focused primarily on the cohort on the right side, because these are the folks who are an absolute perfect fit for a wearable solution, such as what we've created. And the key difference here between what works well for someone on the right side versus the left, so the difference between, say, CP and aphasia, is mostly in the language systems. So if we're talking about speech augmentation, the kind of application that they would interact with for aphasia would be a different kind of application than for CP, but the hardware doesn't really need to change. So it allows us to basically open up new markets with one piece of hardware, and then we can iterate on software to expand that market if we need to. As far as our technology vision, we sort of see this as a midbrain or a hub and spoke kind of model. So we're creating Cognition One as a wearable hub, so that other types of technologies could integrate with it. So we don't have earbuds, we could work with earbud companies. We don't have eye tracking in it. We could work with eye tracking companies. So it accommodates prescription lenses. So if you have to wear prescription lenses, it's designed to sit above your lens, your eye frames, so that you can still use your prescription lenses with the AR environment. So there's a bunch of accommodations that allow us to flex with other sort of signals and control interfaces. If you think about this for a moment, so our vision is the application is king. So ultimately your application is what's going to drive market demand for a product, what it does and what it gives you. But if you think about the application, it takes effort to get into the application. So how does someone access that application? So we think about the things on the left, there's many different ways to access it: through touch, through biosignals, keyboard access, eye tracking, alternative IOs. So these are things that the company has been investing research time to understand and actually prototype and build solutions in all these areas. So we have a great depth of knowledge as a company in all of these IO paradigms for input. And then thinking about this as ways of combining inputs to control the application. So for some folks, it's never just a single whack-a-mole kind of approach where you have one way of accessing it. You might have to combine sensors in order to make it possible for someone to interact with things, right? So think about if you were to tear apart a mouse, a computer mouse, you have several things going on. You have buttons for clicking, and then you have a wheel or an infrared light for determining your position of the mouse. So you actually, to use a mouse, has two modes of sensors, click buttons, mechanical buttons, and then a location sensor. So if you think about a wearable, we take the very same approach where a BCI as a read-only EEG is going to be destined to fail as a control interface because it's not designed to work with other sensors. So we've designed our system to use multiple sensors to help increase the odds of success for a user. So we're using an accelerometer and a gyroscope on the device plus the EEG, and combining those two give us a really good idea of someone's physical abilities and their range of motion and where they're intending to look on things. Plus the EEG allows us to grab on to fixation. So what objects are you visually fixating on? So by combining EEG for fixation plus velocity measures of your movement, we can start to combine those aspects as sensor fusion in the headset. So that's our approach technologically with the headset, as the input side of things, as the control side. But what gets really, really exciting is if you look across the arrows across the top here, when you can combine context awareness, right? So you can take sensor data that's on board the system, you can now start to make inferences that can assist in shrinking the time between intention and outcome. So we're trying to think about recasting the idea of IO from input output to intention and outcome, because ultimately people don't really care about transactional IO. They care about accomplishing something and how quickly can that thing be accomplished, the outcome. And so it's especially magnified for people with disabilities that have even greater access challenges, that we focus on intent and outcome, because there's ways that we can probably shortcut or even skip the traditional transactional IO by taking a strategy like this. So for instance, being able to take external data like, and I'm not suggesting that we're doing this today, but the ability to take ambient light sensor or chronofencing or geofencing and be able to know where someone is or what time of day it is. Just by taking that context awareness, our application, which is a language application, can then be tailored. So the corpus of language could shift based on whether someone's at home or at school or at work, right? So that just by being able to tailor your language and your corpus system, depending on sensors, allows for faster access to those outcomes. You don't have to click as many buttons, or you don't have to interact with as many things to get to the words you want to say. And then lastly, on the output side, there's a number of ways of outputting what we do. So we can output it as spoken word. So the system itself has speakers on it and a display. So it can present those words on the lens outward facing, so that the person that you're communicating with can see the words and phrases you're composing, and you can hear it because it's got speakers on it. If you wanted to have a silent interface, we have integration with a virtual assistant that's built in, that's just software. So we can then send the text string to the voice service or the AI, and that AI can execute whatever those commands are. So it goes beyond just communication into control. So you can control your environment if you think about smart home controls or mobility. Getting in, this is, I'm gonna go kind of deep on some of this, but basically what we're doing here is we're creating a closed loop system. So I don't want to belabor any of this, but essentially what we're doing is in the AR environment, we're using stimulation. So we're doing visual stimulation through very specific frequencies that are appended to graphics in the holograms. So depending on which item you're fixating on, there's a frequency attached to that we can pick out of your EEG data very reliably. And so based on picking that out, we know what object you're fixating on, and there's a control that's associated with that. So that might be the letter Q or the letter R, or it might be the play button or the send it button. And so I know that you're fixating on the send button, so I know that I can send a click command to that send button that closes the loop. And so you see what I'm saying? So it's a closed loop system of reading and writing to the brain. So that positive reinforcement of having a very fast, in less than a second, 1 or 2 seconds, you can fulfill an entire executable. You're teaching the brain positive, negative reinforcement, which is creating a learning journey for someone to say, oh, if I do more of it this way, then I can interact and get better and faster. And I can get negative reinforcement with haptics that are on the headset that can give me like a little buzz to give me like positive, negative reinforcement based on tones. So it truly is an interesting sensorial platform where we're dealing with the eyes, visual cortex, auditory, as well as haptics. I jump here because what's important is that we haven't just sort of cooked this up in a lab. This isn't just some big mastermind idea. This we've essentially created a council of users that are in our addressable population called the Brainiacs. And so we've got over 100 people now that are in our Brainiac Council, mostly in the US, but all around the world. And these represent individuals who are very somewhat prolific in their local communities. Many of these have online communities, large followers. One of our Brainiacs did a TED Talk and has over 1.2 million views of his TED Talk, and he's nonverbal. So these are basically kind of like the next up and coming Stephen Hawkings of the world, right? But rather than one man who's enabled, we're talking about trying to enable hundreds or thousands of individuals to go out, live their life, change their world, and make their own respective dents in the universe. And so these folks use different kinds of technology today to communicate, and we're trying to work with them, not for them, to design Cognition One so that it could become their next platform for changing the world. I'm going to kind of skip past this, but we've been doing a lot of human factors testing, going out into the field and visiting with individuals, doing actual physical testing. And we engage with those Brainiacs just about every month over Zooms with surveys and presenting updates and things. So it's very collaborative. We launched an app a couple of years ago, and it has about 70,000 people that use it. It's on iPads and iPhones. And it's a two-dimensional communication system, and that's enabled us to learn a lot about what people want to do, what they want to say. It's also enabled them to register into our database so that when the headset's ready, those are going to be the first people that we're going to be providing the headsets to. So folks can download our application called Speak Pros in the Apple App Store and register. And if someone wants to get early access or get onto an early wait list for the Cognition One, that would be the best way to go about doing it. Regarding go-to-market, so Cognition One, the headset will be first made available through corporate and university research labs worldwide. So we haven't yet announced our partnership, but we have a partnership with a company that makes and sells physiological instruments, amplifiers, analysis software, biometric acquisition technologies, and they sell to 99% of the universities worldwide. So our headset already integrates with their analysis software, so they're planning to bring it to market as another acquisition paradigm for researchers to be able to use. So that's going to be really exciting. So if anyone in this community is associated with a university or a corporate research lab that might want to get Cognition One and use it for any kind of research or studies or development, please let us know and we can get you onto the list. As far as how we go to market, we spend a lot of our time focusing on our users, understanding them and working with them. But primarily for what we're doing, our go-to-market is through speech therapy and neurology. So speech therapists are typically the clinical professionals who will work with a patient or a student to do a cognitive and physical evaluation, and they will match the appropriate technology and augmentative solution for that user. So speech therapy is a big deal for us. There's about 150,000 clinically certified speech therapists in the United States. So we're starting to build a bit of a network amongst speech pathologists nationwide. And then neurologists also often get involved depending on the severity or the circumstances, whether it's an acquired disorder and somebody say has a stroke and then they go to a neurologist and the neurologist refers a speech therapist. So it's a bit of a circular Mobius curve here between speech therapy and neurology. So I'm going to kind of try and zip through some more of this. I can't see my clock, so please keep me on track as far as timing. So technology overview.
Yeah, we're good. It's we're 37 minutes in, and we can go to the end of the hour, top of the hour.
Okay, great. I'll try and get through this because I want to allow for some Q&A here. So the construct here is that on the EEG side, it's a fully wireless wearable BCI. So everything is included inside. It's designed to be worn for long duration periods. We support 8 channels of EEG acquisition, 2 of which are auxiliary channels, which we can route to different locations on the body. 6 of them are fixed location on the visual cortex and the parieto-occipital lobe. So PO3, PO4, and O1, O2, and then POZ and OZ. So we're really focusing mainly our EEG on the visual field. If you look at the composition of things, it's a tremendous amount of industrial design to make it elegant and comfortable and lightweight, very well balanced. All of it's no dangly wires. It's all sort of, it's kind of like the Bugatti of or the Tesla of BCI, I guess. Rob Report, which is a famous magazine that specializes in luxury products and things, did an interesting story about us. I'm a car guy, so I was really pretty impressed that they wrote about this. It felt like they did an article on a Formula One car or something. But we're very proud of the work that we're doing here. It looks great. It doesn't look like a medical device, right? It was intentionally designed to look like something anybody would want to use. And that's the point, is that we want to make neuroscience and neurotechnology unassuming and fun and enjoyable and accessible, and not something that you would think came out of a lab. I'm going to kind of skip on. It's also got lots of adjustments and additional support. So whether you need the head strap across the top, we're also integrating anchors for a chin strap. So for individuals who move around a lot, or you're doing research and you need to be on a skateboard or a bicycle or something, the ability to keep it really on stable. You can add those to it. We have a BOA cabling system built in, so you can adjust it for a number of different head sizes, kind of like you'd find on ski boots or on a helmet. Also, reference and ground are integrated into the side straps, so we can deal with a very low profile, sort of streamlined look, and also no dangly wires that get in the way or get in the way or impede with eyeglasses. Each electrode, reference and ground, and also the electrodes on the back are individually adjustable axially, so up to 9 millimeters. So you can deal with extreme personalization regarding comfort and impedance. On the back, it's got a removable cover, so if you need to have everything covered up after you've made those adjustments, you can do so. So for instance, individuals in wheelchairs that have a headrest, we want to be able to put the cover on there so that none of the dials get bumped or modified while their head is resting against the headrest or in a prone position. The BCI itself can be powered on or powered off. So you can use the AR by itself, or you can use AR with the BCI. So it just kind of depends on what is best for the user. And you see the 2 auxiliary ports on the left. Those support 2 additional channels. Today, we're limiting it to EEG channels, but in the future, we'd like to have multiple models running on it. So you could combine EMG, EEG, electrooculography, and all of that processing is happening digitally on the pipe. That whole pipeline is being processed on the headset itself. So dealing with multi-sensor biometric processing on the back is really the goal here. The AR piece is actually remarkably accessible in the sense that we didn't invest heavily on the AR side as far as hardware. There's been billions of dollars invested in that, and we don't want to recreate what Magic Leap and HoloLens and Apple and Facebook and all those guys are doing. We chose a mobile AR form factor. So essentially the AR part of this is a heads-up display that accommodates an iPhone SE to be dropped in with integrated power. So really, if anyone wants to be able to develop a Unity application on iOS, they can use this interface to create other applications besides those that we have. You can see here how the phone slides in there with integrated lightning power management. And so on the back, we have, you see here in the back left, we have one USB-C with a power bridge inside of it. So we power the BCI and the phone with a single USB charger. So we remove a lot of that complexity. Also for individuals with wheelchairs, this could drop, you could drop this USB-C to a power bank that's on board on the wheelchair so that you could have infinite power without any concerns of being kind of on 12-volt mains. We also, one of the things that we were frustrated by when we did our original proof of concepts was the lack of access to the bare metal of the BCI, of using other people's hardware. So we made it a point to ensure that we had developer tools for ourselves, which we're going to make available to other people, that allow for bare metal configuration of the BCI itself for those researchers. So all the way down to bit registers, flipping bits on specific on specific registers, the ability to change your sample rates, being able to turn on and off certain channels, being able to append metadata to your EEG data. So if you needed to have specific time markers or annotations that are associated with your EEG, you'd be able to do that. So there's a bunch of really cool stuff that is coming with this when we're shipping. This is actually some older pictures of our alpha, which we had last summer. But you can see, this was one of our early test units, was fully integrated system. I'll kind of skip some of this for now. So just a couple of highlights, just the core innovations on the BCI. It's wireless, wearable, fully untethered. So it's designed for low power. It's very much designed to be fast to set up and easy to break down. And it's designed for mobile use cases and apps. All the onboard signal processing, we're able to right now, between the BCI and the phone, we share a Bluetooth low energy connection. So it's BLE5. And we're able to stream 1,000 samples per second per channel times 8 channels. So we're roughly 8,000 samples per second of lossless data transmission from the BCI to the phone wirelessly. Now we can also bump that up to 8,000 samples per second times 8 channels, or 64,000 samples per second serial out of the USB. So if you want to hook it up to a computer instead of do the wireless interaction, you'd be able to have extremely high bandwidth raw data pumping out, squirting out of the system. So, you know, right now, I believe we may be setting the benchmark as far as the high watermark on raw sample rate for a wearable, especially when it comes to streaming data. Think about this as what we're able to do is take like what QuickTime did for video codecs and being able to stream, stream and compress video data. We're doing something similar within our technology, within our firmware, to do that with biodata. So we haven't branded it yet, but if there's kind of cognition inside, we'd kind of be the QuickTime equivalent of that, for that eventuality where maybe things get smaller and smaller and we need to stream biodata from one system to another or from one sensor to another actuation. We're sort of laying the groundwork here to be able to do that. I'm going to try and fly through some more of this, but deep personalization, that's really key to what we're doing, is ensuring that we can personalize the experience for that individual. We're thinking about this for augmenting social interactions, so communicating with individuals in front of you or at a distance. And that you can do a lot with language as an interface. So think about the idea that, you know, the difference between a Chinese brain and a Spanish brain and a Norwegian brain. You know, you've got different language, but language is a human construct. It's a creative thing that we've produced as far as language systems. Our brains aren't technically different per se, right? And so what we're doing is we're putting language, localized language, as the understandable interface, but your control is really your biometric control of an acceptable language interface. So once you can get things to a language interface, you're getting to meaning, and that meaning you can then configure it however you want as an application. So I'm going to skip past some of this stuff, but just kind of the spoiler is that the AI that we're integrating in this is Alexa. We've already integrated Alexa inside of our mobile application. And Alexa will be integrated with this as well. So you'll be able to control anything you can do with Alexa, you'll be able to do with your mind. So our focus really is communication, but we see that we can move into other capabilities such as consumption, control, and eventually the ultimate goal is creativity, right? The open freestyle creation. So long form, short form content, art, music. Like imagine what you might be able to do with this kind of interface to create things. It's a large population, like I said, there's about 1.7 million in the US. There's funding sources that we're addressing through insurance reimbursement model as a speech generating device. There's, you know, worldwide, there's about $6.2 trillion of healthcare funding that's accessible. So we're addressing Medicare, Medicaid, private insurance, and then there's also other funding sources such as the telecommunications access programs for people that need communication access. Primarily that was for hearing impairment, but those laws are now spreading in to support people who are nonverbal as well. We've been focusing on building resellers in 2020 and getting into production this year. And our goal is to be able to start dealing with insurance funding and healthcare purchases in 2022. So that's that. So if you want to learn more, go to one.cognition.com. We'd be excited to engage with this community. Obviously, there's an abundance of opportunities and applications I'm sure you guys will all be interested in seeing if this could be useful for. If you're associated with a university or a corporate lab and you might want to purchase one of these for the lab, we'd be open to that. Or if you just want to give us a high five, we're open to that too. So.
Fabulous. Thanks, Andres. I feel like I was drinking from the fire hose. There's a lot there. One thing that jumps out at me is just the elegance of the design. I mean, and the thoughtfulness that went into it. having tracked the company for a little bit, that's one thing I didn't quite realize how deep it goes on the design side. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Quick question, University of Colorado, have you been in touch with them?
No.
Okay, so I might circle back with you on that one. So folks who have questions, if you could put that in the chat and we can maybe unmute you that way. We've had a few folks join during the call. I wanted to go back to what you kind of closed
stop
on.
sharing here?
No, why don't you leave that up so people have the contact. But people want to come off, they can go on, want to open their video, please feel free. Your friend Simeon from Italy has joined, so you can give him a wave. I had a question, you closed with a little bit about the funding, and that was maybe the one thing I didn't dive deeper on is, you know, there's a couple things going on here. One is that you have foregrounded the assistive technology aspect of this and the value and that transformative aspect. There's a lot of other kind of things that come after that, but that is a segment of the health tech market that isn't as well funded as others. So you've clearly done some homework on funding sources and grants and the like. But do you have and I've I guess noticed in the health tech, if you say health tech or anything like that, people say, oh great, you have a insurance tech intervention. Can you make processes more efficient? You know, that kind of thing. Do you feel you have trouble getting attention for the focus that you have, and how are you dealing with that?
With which community?
The investment community.
You know, yeah, you raise a good point, because it's a little bit of a Goldilocks sort of situation here, right? You know, because within the investment community, you know, we've got a lot of things going on here that are converged, right? So we have AI, we have AR, you know, neuroscience, we have sort of frontier tech, we have wearable, we have device, hardware, you know, so there's a lot of sort of variables. And so when you look at that and say, there's kind of like this perfect investor who is tolerant to hardware, right? They're not afraid of hardware, but they understand that the hardware investment is really in service of, one, providing the outcomes, right? So the healthcare outcomes is a derivative of the hardware, but also the data, right? The data science, and as a platform, it opens up tremendous breadth of other applications that can be deployed via software. So it truly is a platform play, but it takes a certain kind of investor who sees that future and says, your beachhead is going to be this durable medical equipment as a wearable prosthetic first, as a speech generating device. We get it as your first market. But then you start to look at these adjacent opportunities where you can still stay within healthcare, or we could branch out into other industries, right? We could go into education, we could go into government, we could go into, you know, other areas.
You can make more.
We could go into human performance, we could go into, you know, neural marketing if we needed to. So there's a lot of optionality with this solution, which is extremely exciting, I think, for most investors. They love, because most investors, to your point, they're kind of like, they're 1 or 2 degrees of separated from our target market. So it's hard for them to get their head around, like, I'm not sure what I'm looking at and if it's the right or wrong solution. But when you start to look at the bigger picture, this truly is a platform investment that could be disruptive in many areas. So for instance, therapeutics. So, you know, I know you mentioned like gamma therapy and other things. You know, this is kind of an emerging area that's been kind of, it comes every 10 years maybe. You know, you're dealing with like 40 hertz, you know, therapies and other things, but there seems to be some interesting research now emerging around, say, amyloid plaque treatments for Alzheimer's regarding 40 hertz visual therapy and auditory therapy. Well, this as a platform could absolutely functionally satisfy the needs to deliver on that kind of science. You know, so you could drop this into Alzheimer's care or memory care, and then all of a sudden this opens up an entire therapeutic market, you know, and what's that worth, right? You know, so there's interesting ways to kind of say it's about like a tree branch, and this is the trunk, and we have areas to branch out, but this is where we're focused right now. But it is challenging because you never find like the perfect investor, right? So for us on our current fundraise, we acknowledge that, and we're looking to create a composite for our current fundraise to say we're looking for lead VC for frontier tech, lead VC with digital health regulatory experience, and working together, right? Because a frontier tech individual is more interested in the neurotech, the underlying IP, the advances in the state of the art of signal processing and all this other stuff. Whereas the digital health regulatory person is really, what's your path to market? How do we clear the regulatory hurdles? How do we create defensible moat, in that area? And we have the capacity internally to think about that strategically, but it's helpful to have funding partners that have been through both of those, of how do you monetize frontier tech and how do you get through the regulatory path.
Great, thanks, great answer.
Yeah.
Quick tech question, because you just brushed on it, is, there's a lot, probably a much deeper tech dive you could do on, signal processing, signal acquisition. Do you see, are there kind of limits right now on the sensor side of it? Or, how much granularity can you get out of the actual sensors and electrodes?
Mm-hmm.
Is that
the weakest link in the pipeline is the electrode itself.
Uh-huh.
It's really a material science issue and a human factors issue around dermal contact and how an electrode can retain signal quality over long periods of time, given all the ambient changes that happen, either movement artifacts or humidity changes, sweat, other kinds of wear and tear, any kind of assaults on the electrode itself, shielding. So that the electrode piece itself is kind of the weakest link of the overall chain. We've been able to accommodate that through a strategy around signal stimulation. So that, the way we're designing stimulators that can be perceived through the visual cortex. So part of it is in the stimulation side that we're innovating to kind of work around some of those deficiencies regarding electrodes. And then also on the software, like the machine learning side, like once those signals have been acquired, how we're conditioning those signals, how we're dealing with averaging, how we're dealing with just the processing of those signals and the speed at which we can process those. That's the other way we're kind of working around the physical drawbacks of the actual electrode. I think there's a huge area of opportunity for electrode innovation. We actually have some concepts that are like know-how and IP that we've created, but you can only solve so many problems, right? And so, if there was somebody that raised their hand and said, "Hey, I know how to make electrodes, what's your design?" We'd be happy to work with that individual to license what we've come up with and have them make it. But
we've got an idea there too. We had a Colorado State University professor last year speak, and he's got a new design for electrodes. I'll give you a pointer there as well. I'll make an introduction if you want.
Super.
Yeah, that's okay. That makes sense. We've got time for one more question. Anybody in the audience? Nobody's chatting in here. I know you're all out there still.
Nobody's mentioned my shirt. You guys don't like pandas sitting in like donuts? I wore this just for you.
Yeah, I was laughing about that at the start of the call, and just want to thank you for your time. Excellent presentation. I was certainly drinking from the fire hose, just like Don, to digest that all. I was curious if you had an event in your life that really triggered you to send you on this mission and made this purpose instilled in you.
Yeah, I think I was born a curious kid. I was a bit of an introvert when I was young. My background is art. So as an artist, I've always sort of thought about things maybe differently than other folks. And till later in life, I didn't realize I thought differently until it really, it takes a while to sort of look in the mirror and realize like, it's okay to be different. And so I think I've always had a knack for looking at things in unusual ways and kind of hunting for why. So I would kind of ask, why does that happen? And then why does that happen? Why does that happen? So I've always kind of tried to get to a root cause, like first principle approach to things. So that's just me as a human. But then, what triggered me to sort of do this as opposed to any other job or anything else was my mom got sick. So she had pneumonia. And she went into the intensive care unit and was immediately put on a ventilator and intubated. So a lot of what the horror stories you see with COVID today, where it's just super scary and traumatic, that was my life in 2012. And I got thrown into that situation back then, and I realized how traumatic it is to lose your ability to communicate. If you can't say something and someone doesn't understand you, then all kinds of things can go wrong. Your quality of care can go wrong. The doctor could misinterpret your response and give you the wrong medicine or the wrong dose. I mean, you could have all kinds of things, from insignificant to extremely significant outcomes because of a lack of communication. And that's really sort of what set me on this path.
I think that's just a great way to end the hour. So thanks again, Andreas. Really appreciate your being with us and sharing. If you want us to, so we've got the recording. We'll have that out ready tomorrow. We'll get you a link. And if you want to make the slides available, let me know. Just send them over. I want to thank Megan, I think is still on, for helping me set this up. Appreciate the help. And thanks everybody for joining the call. We'll see you hopefully next month. And a couple of months from now, we'll see you in person.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Don.
All right, guys. Have a great day.
Thanks all.
Thank you.